Love dies the moment you stop believing in accidents. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I learned that coincidence is just another word for evidence you haven't finished gathering. The coffee was still hot. The radio played something forgettable about autumn leaves. My husband's phone sat face up on the kitchen counter between the butter dish and the unopened mail, and when it buzzed, I glanced at it the way anyone would, reflexively without thought, the same way you turn toward any sound in your own home. Don't forget, Emily's birthday. I stared at those 4 words for longer than it takes to understand them. My name is Sarah. It has always been Sarah. We didn't know anyone named Emily. Not a single Emily in his office, not one in our neighborhood, no Emily among the parents at our daughter's school. I had a strange, clear thought. I should remember this moment. The way the light came through the window above the sink. The smell of burnt toast I'd scraped into the trash. The exact pitch of the refrigerator's hum. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears. One small truth at a time. Before that morning, we were ordinary. Not happy in any way that photographs well, but content in the practiced way of people who have chosen each other and meant it. We had a daughter, Mia, who was 7 and obsessed with frogs. We had a mortgage and a vegetable garden that never quite produced tomatoes. We had 17 years of accumulated compromise, habit, and understanding. David worked in project management for a logistics company. I taught piano to children who rarely practiced. We split the dishes without discussing it anymore. He loaded, I dried. On Sundays, we made pancakes. On Fridays, he picked up Indian takeout from the place on Riverside that knew our order. We fell asleep watching television we barely cared about, his hand resting on my hip in that comfortable, almost unconscious way that married people touch. Not passion, just proof of presence. There were no dramatic fights, no screaming, no slammed doors, no nights spent in separate rooms. If anything, we were too quiet. We had learned to exist around each other like water around stones, smooth and unremarkable. I thought that meant peace. I didn't know then that silence could be distance wearing a disguise. Looking back now, I can see the signs I mistook for normalcy. The way he started running his fingers through his hair more often, a nervous gesture I'd forgotten he had. How his phone became something he carried from room to room instead of leaving it charging in the kitchen overnight. Small shifts in routine that seemed too minor to notice. Showers that lasted longer, cologne on weekdays. A new playlist I heard through the car speakers when I borrowed his sedan. But these weren't red flags. They were just adjustments. People change. Marriages evolve. I told myself this even as some animal part of my brain started counting the nights he worked late, cataloging the excuses. That all sounded reasonable, but somehow never quite convinced me. I didn't know then that this would be the last season I slept well. After I saw the notification, I set the phone back exactly where it had been. I poured my coffee and watched it cool. I listened to David upstairs, the shower running, the familiar rhythm of his morning routine. When he came down 20 minutes later, hair still damp, smelling like mint and cedar, I smiled at him the way I had smiled at him for 17 years. "Morning," he said, kissing my temple without breaking stride toward the coffee pot. "Morning." He picked up his phone, glanced at it, silenced something. His expression didn't change. No guilt, no panic, no visible fracture in the pleasant mask of a Tuesday morning. He poured his coffee. He asked if we needed milk. He mentioned something about a late meeting on Thursday. I nodded. I agreed. I said I'd pick up Mia from her friend's house after school. My voice sounded normal. I wondered if I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, or if I'd always had this talent for pretending, this ability to perform the ordinary while something inside me quietly unraveled. Emily's birthday. I repeated it in my head like a foreign phrase, trying to make it mean something other than what it meant. Maybe she was a client. Maybe a new coworker he'd mentioned, and I'd forgotten. Maybe the notification was wrong, a glitch, someone else's reminder appearing on his phone through some technological accident I couldn't explain. But I knew. The way you know when a room has been entered in your absence, even if nothing looks disturbed. The way you know when a smile is genuine or manufactured. The way you know, in the deepest part of yourself, when your life has already changed and you're just the last one to acknowledge it. I didn't ask him about Emily. Not that morning, not that week. Instead, I started noticing things. The receipts were the first language I learned to translate. They appeared on the counter where he emptied his pockets. Crumpled paper testimony to a life I wasn't part of. Dinner for two at a restaurant we'd never been to. Coffee from a shop across town, time-stamped at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday when he'd said he was in back-to-back meetings. A purchase from a bookstore, $47.83, which seemed too specific to be nothing. I didn't confront him with these. I folded them carefully and tucked them into the back of my sock drawer beneath the wool ones I never wore. I'm not sure why. Evidence, maybe. Or maybe I just needed proof that I wasn't imagining the distance that had grown between us like fog filling a valley, slow, imperceptible, until one day you realize you can't see the other side. His phone became a stranger. He changed the passcode, which he'd never done in all the years we'd been together. When I asked about it casually, "What's your new code, in case I need to call someone if yours dies?" he said he'd set it to something random for security at work. 4 digits that might as well have been a deadbolt. He started volunteering to run errands, the pharmacy, the grocery store, the hardware store for light bulbs we didn't need. Each trip took an hour longer than it should have. He always came back with exactly what he'd said he was going for, plus one small thing he'd remembered we were out of. Mayonnaise, batteries, toothpaste. Small acts of consideration that felt like alibis. I watched him the way you watch weather changing, trying to predict the storm before it arrives. The way he checked his phone first thing when he woke up and last thing before sleep. The way his texts were now always sent from other rooms, his voice low and smooth through the walls. The way he said he was tired more often, but never seemed to sleep. At night, in bed, I lay next to him in the dark and listened to his breathing. Sometimes I reached out and touched his shoulder, just to see if he'd wake up. He never did. Or maybe he did and just pretended otherwise, the same way I pretended not to notice the new careful distance in every gesture, how he kissed me on the cheek now instead of the mouth, how his hand no longer found mine across the couch, how he forgot the small rituals we'd built over 17 years. He stopped asking what I'd done with my day. I stopped telling him. By the time November arrived, I had become someone who searched. I waited until he left for work, then opened his laptop, still logged in, still trustingly unlocked. I looked through browser histories that revealed nothing but work emails and sports scores. I checked coat pockets and found only receipts I'd already cataloged. I scrolled through credit card statements looking for patterns, trying to decode which charges were innocent and which ones told a different story. There was a charge to a florist, $63.50. I remembered that day. He'd come home with nothing. I found a hotel receipt tucked into his gym bag, dated 3 weeks earlier. He told me he was at a conference overnight. The hotel was local, 15 minutes from our house. The evidence accumulated quietly, like snow. Each piece alone was defensible. Together they built something I couldn't ignore, but still, I said nothing. I think I was afraid that speaking it aloud would make it real, would tip us past some point of return. As long as I kept silent, we could keep pretending. As long as I didn't ask, he didn't have to lie. The silence became its own language. We spoke in pleasantries and logistics. Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up Mia from soccer? We're out of paper towels. I'll be home late Friday. The architecture of our conversations grew simpler, stripped of anything that might require honesty. I started sleeping on my side of the bed without crossing the invisible line that had formed down the middle. Some nights I lay awake and counted his breaths, trying to remember when intimacy had become performance, when connection had become negotiation. We still had sex occasionally, quick, quiet, practical. Afterward, he'd say, "Love you." In the same tone, he'd say, "Good night," or "See you tomorrow." I'd say it back. The words felt like stones in my mouth. My daughter noticed before I did that something had shifted. One evening in early December, while we were setting the table, she asked, "Are you and Dad fighting?" "No, honey. You don't laugh anymore." I thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. She was right. We didn't laugh. We didn't fight either. We just existed beside each other, two people going through the motions of a marriage that had become habit without substance, routine without joy. I wanted to feel rage. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him see what he was doing to us. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and removed something essential, leaving only the structure behind, all the bones and muscles still working, still functional, but missing the part that made it matter. The confrontation came on a Saturday evening in mid-December in our kitchen while Mia was at a sleepover. There was nothing cinematic about it. No dramatic music, no perfectly crafted accusations, just two tired people standing on opposite sides of an island counter. the dishwasher humming between us. His phone buzzed. He picked it up, read something, smiled slightly. "Who is she?" The words came out of my mouth before I decided to say them. David looked up, and for just a second I saw it. The flash of panic, quickly smothered. "What?" "Emily. Or whoever she is now. Who is she?" He set the phone down slowly, face down. The gesture felt like confirmation. "Sarah, don't. Just don't." My voice sounded calm. I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "I've known for months. I just need you to say it." The silence stretched between us like something physical. I could hear the clock in the hallway, the heater clicking on, a car passing outside. Normal sounds. The world continuing as if nothing was ending. "Her name is Rachel, not Emily." Emily's birthday was someone else, a detail I would never fully understand. One more small mystery in the larger collapse. "How long?" "A year, a little more." "A year." While I was teaching scales to children, while I was buying groceries and folding his laundry and sleeping beside him, trusting him. A whole year. "Do you love her?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I don't know." "But you don't love me." "That's not." He stopped, started again. "It's not that simple." "It is, though. It's exactly that simple." He reached for me then, or started to, but his hand stopped halfway across the counter, like he'd forgotten the rules, forgotten whether touching me was still allowed. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised us both. "Then what did you want?" He looked down at his hands. "I don't know. Something different, something that felt like waking up instead of just getting through another day." The honesty of it hurt more than any lie could have. Because I understood. I'd felt it too. The slow drift into routine, the years when passion calcified into partnership. The way marriage could become something you endured rather than chose. But I'd thought we were enduring it together. I didn't know he'd been looking for an exit. "Does she know about us? About Mia?" "Yes." "And she doesn't care?" "She thinks we're already separated." Another lie, layered over the first. I wondered how many versions of our life existed, the one I thought we were living, the one he told Rachel we had, the one he told himself to make the betrayal bearable. "I want you to leave." He nodded. No argument, no plea for another chance, just acceptance, like he'd been waiting for permission. "Tonight?" "Yes." He left the kitchen. I heard him moving upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the zip of a suitcase. I stood exactly where I was, hands flat on the counter, trying to remember how to breathe. When he came back down, bag in hand, he stopped in the doorway. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Sorry felt too small, too easy. It was a word people said when they wanted absolution, when they wanted you to tell them it was okay, that you understood, that they were still good despite the harm they'd done. He waited a moment longer, then left. The door closed quietly behind him. Not a slam, just a click. The sound of something ending without ceremony. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after his car pulled away. The house felt different immediately, lighter, but also more fragile, like a structure missing a load-bearing wall. I noticed things I'd stopped seeing. A water stain on the ceiling, dust on the blinds, a crack in the tile near the stove. Eventually, I cleaned the kitchen. I wiped down the counters, put away the dishes, took out the trash. Small, ordinary tasks that made me feel like I still had control over something. It was only later, lying in bed alone for the first time in 17 years, that I cried. Not loud, wrenching sobs, but quiet tears that slipped down my temples into my hair. Grief that felt more like exhaustion. I'd been holding on for so long, pretending everything was fine, that letting go felt almost like relief. The months after he left blurred together. We told Mia before Christmas. She took it better than I expected, or maybe worse, her lack of reaction felt like its own kind of trauma. She asked if it was because of her. We both said no, the only truth we agreed on. She nodded and went back to her room. Later, I heard her crying through the door, but when I knocked, she said she was fine. David moved into an apartment across town. We split custody without lawyers. Every other weekend, Wednesday dinners, alternating holidays. We were civil, almost friendly. It was worse than hatred. Hatred would have at least acknowledged passion. This was just Logistics, the dismantling of a shared life reduced to a spreadsheet. I learned new routines. 1 mug in the morning instead of 2. Cooking for 2 instead of 3 when Mia was home. Sleeping diagonally across the bed because I could. The house echoed differently. I heard sounds I'd never noticed before. The way the walls settled at night, the drip of the bathroom faucet, the creak of floorboards in the empty rooms. Friends reached out with casseroles and concern. I accepted both with gratitude I didn't quite feel. They asked if I was okay. I said yes. They asked if I needed anything. I said no. What I needed was to rewind time, to go back to the morning I saw that notification and make a different choice, to ask immediately instead of letting months pass while I gathered evidence. Or maybe to have paid better attention years earlier, to have seen the slow drift before it became a canyon. But you can't rewind. You can only move forward into the strange new shape of your life. I kept finding his things for months. A razor in the back of the bathroom drawer, his favorite coffee mug that somehow survived the division of property, a jacket in the hall closet that still smelled like him. Each discovery felt like reopening a wound I thought had scabbed over. In February, I ran into them at the grocery store. Rachel was younger than me, though not as young as I'd imagined. Pretty in an unremarkable way. She stood close to David, her hand on his arm, laughing at something he'd said. He saw me first. His expression cycled through surprise, guilt, something that might have been regret. He raised his hand in a small wave. I turned my cart around and left without buying anything. That night, I looked at our wedding photos for the first time since he'd moved out. We looked so young, so certain. I tried to remember what it felt like to believe we would last forever, to think that love was enough. That girl seemed like someone else entirely, naive, hopeful, unbearably trusting. I wondered if Rachel looked at David the way I had in those photos, if she believed she was different, special, the one he would never betray. I wanted to warn her. I wanted to tell her that people don't change. They just find new people to be themselves with. But I didn't. Some lessons you can only learn by living them. By the time spring arrived, I had stopped waiting for him to come back. Some part of me had been expecting an apology, a realization, a moment when he'd knock on the door and say he'd made a terrible mistake. It didn't come. He seemed happy, or at least content, in his new life. He and Rachel moved in together. He posted photos on social media, dinners out, weekend trips, carefully curated evidence of a fresh start. I deleted my apps. I didn't need to see proof of his happiness. I was building my own life, slower and less photogenic, but real in a way his performance felt manufactured. I started teaching again at the community center, adding adult students who actually practiced. I went to therapy, finally, and learned words for things I'd only felt. Codependency, emotional neglect, the slow erosion of self that happens when you prioritize peace over truth. I learned that I'd been complicit in my own unhappiness, that by staying silent, I'd given permission for the betrayal to continue. Mia adjusted in the way children do, resilient on the surface, carrying small wounds she'd unpack later in life. She stopped asking when Dad was coming home and started asking what was for dinner. She grew 3 inches. She joined the school play. She fell in love with painting instead of frogs. Life moved forward. Some nights, I still lay awake and replayed our years together like a film I was trying to understand. I looked for the exact moment when love became routine, when partnership became loneliness. I wanted to identify the turning point, the place where I could have intervened and changed the ending. But there was no single moment. It was 1,000 small moments, 1,000,000 tiny choices that accumulated into distance. The nights we stopped talking about our days, the mornings we woke up without touching, the years when we treated marriage like an obligation instead of a choice we made new each day. I thought about the notification that started everything. Don't forget, Emily's birthday. I never learned who Emily was. Maybe she was Rachel's sister, her coworker, her friend. Maybe she was another woman entirely. Another lie I'd never uncover. In the end, it didn't matter. Emily was just the crack that revealed the fault line. The truth would have surfaced eventually, in some other way. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner, for staying silent, for thinking I could love us back to wholeness. I learned that you can't save a marriage alone, that 2 people have to want the same future, that sometimes love isn't enough when one person is already gone. It's been 2 years now. David and Rachel are engaged. He told me over email, polite and distant, like informing an acquaintance. I said congratulations. I meant it. His happiness doesn't wound me anymore. It exists in a separate life that has nothing to do with mine. I'm dating someone. His name is Michael. He's kind in the effortless way some people are, attentive without being performative. It's slow and careful and nothing like the beginning with David. I don't trust it yet. Not fully. I keep waiting for the moment when his phone buzzes with someone else's name, when the receipts stop adding up, when the distance starts creeping in. Michael knows this. We've talked about it, about how betrayal leaves you changed, how trust becomes something you have to choose, instead of something you just feel. He's patient. He doesn't push. He leaves his phone face up on the table and tells me his passcode, without me asking. Maybe this is what healing looks like. Not the absence of scars, but learning to exist with them. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it dictate the future. Mia asked me recently if I still loved her father. We were in the kitchen, the same kitchen where it all ended, making dinner together. I thought about it honestly before answering. I love the person he was, I said. Or the person I thought he was. I don't know if that's the same thing. She nodded, wise beyond her years. Mom, I'm glad you're happy now. I realized I was, not in the loud, obvious way happiness gets portrayed, but in the quiet way of someone who has survived something hard and come out softer instead of harder. Happy in the way of knowing myself better. Happy in the way of sleeping through the night. Happy in the small, ordinary moments that make up a life. Good coffee, sunlight through windows, my daughter's laugh, the permission to start again. I don't think about David every day anymore. When I do, it's not with anger or longing, just a kind of distant recognition. He was my husband. He broke my heart. Both things are true. Both things are in the past. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember that Tuesday morning in October when his phone buzzed on the counter. I remember the exact moment when my life split into before and after. I remember thinking I should remember it. And I do. Not because it destroyed me, but because it taught me that love requires vigilance, that trust must be earned continuously, that the worst kind of loneliness is the kind you feel beside someone who's already left. I never learned who Emily was, but I learned who I was. I learned I was strong enough to walk through betrayal and come out the other side. I learned that endings can also be beginnings, that grief is just love with nowhere to go, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending everything is fine. The notification still plays in my head sometimes. Don't forget, Emily's birthday. I haven't forgotten. I never will. But I've learned to live with the memory of it, the reminder that even in ordinary moments on unremarkable Tuesday mornings, while the coffee cools and the radio plays, your entire life can shift beneath your feet, and you can survive it. You can even rebuild.